The streets of Campbellworth were alive with the steady hum of midday. Merchant called from stalls laden with fabric, steel, and spices. The air was thick with the sense of oil, hot metal, and baking bread. Jihye walked beside Joaquin through the bustle, the two of them weaving through the carts and horses, eyes on the task before them. The market of the western quarter was wide and open to the sea breeze, its cobbles worn smooth by generations of traders. A blacksmith's forge roared at the center, sending sparks into the air. The rhythmic clang of hammer on steel echoed down the narrow lanes. Beside it, a fletcher's stall displayed rows of fine arrows, their fletching neat and pale as gull feathers. "This Joaquin said, voice low but calm. "If we are travelled to the coast, then through the laurines I will need arrows worthy of the forest." Jihye followed, glancing over the display of weaponry as they passed. She carried the group's blades wrapped in oilcloth, ready to be sharpened and repaired. Her hand brushed against the weight of the amulet in her coat pocket, a familiar and unsettling reassurance. At the Fletcher's stall, Joaquin's eyes lit with recognition. Among the ordinary shafts lay a set apart. Their heads silvered, their feathers darker, tinged faintly with green. The craftsman noticed his interest. "You have a good eye," the man said proudly. "Elven make, true to the mark, light as breath, and never warp in rain." "Real?" Joaquin asked quietly. The Fletcher nodded. "Straight from the southern glades. They came with a caravan of traders last winter, not cheap." Joaquin smiled faintly, almost wistfully, as he took one in hand. "No, I imagine not." He tested the balance, the weight perfect, the fletching fine between his fingers. After a moment's hesitation, he handed over a few coins from his pouch. "6 of these," he said. The Fletcher's grin widened. "A fine choice, my lord." Joaquin's shoulders stiffened at the title, but he let it pass. He gathered the arrows and placed them carefully in his quiver. Meanwhile, Jihye had crossed to the forge. The blacksmith was a broad woman with arms like coiled rope and a face blackened with soot. She took the blades from Jihye without a word, testing the edges with quick, practiced motions. "They've seen good use," she remarked. Jihye smiled faintly. "We travel hard." The woman nodded and placed the weapons on her bench. "Come back in an hour, I'll have them ready." Jihye bowed her head in thanks, turning to rejoin Joaquin. She barely took 2 steps before she felt the whisper. "I've been looking for you." The voice came from just behind her, low, close enough that the warmth of breath brushed her ear. Jihye froze. Every instinct sharpened in an instant. She turned slowly. Valerian stood there. His presence was wrong in the daylight, as though the world itself rejected him. He was immaculate, as always, dressed in a dark coat cut from fine cloth that spoke of money and menace. His hair, streaked with grey now, was tied neatly at the back of his neck, and his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, met hers with a smile that was far too calm. "I will admit, I doubted my hunters," he said quietly. "But I have learned to trust my own hand. You've led me on quite the chase, Jihye." She did not move. Around them the noise at the marketplace continued undisturbed, the crowd flowing like a river that had chosen not to notice the storm brewing within it. "Valerian," she said, her voice flat, "you should not have come." His smile deepened. "You mistake me, my dear. I should have come sooner." Something cold pressed between her shoulder blades. A knife. She felt its point through her cloak, firm and unyielding. "Now," Valerian murmured, "you and I are going to have a little conversation, and I'd rather it not end in a scene." Jihye's heart pounded, but her face remained composed. Innocence filled the street. There was no room for blood here. She let her hands fall loosely at her sides, forcing calm. "Good," he said, satisfied. "Walk." He prodded her forward with the blade, guiding her away from the market and into one of the narrow lanes that split off between the buildings. The noise of trade faded behind them, replaced by the distant echo of gulls and the drip of water from a broken gutter. The alley was damp and shadowed, walled by stones slick with moss. Joaquin, still by the Fletcher stall, turned at the faintest motion, a shift in Jihye's stance that was wrong, a stiffness that spoke of danger. He saw her disappearing down the side street with a tall man he did not recognize. Without a word, he followed. Valerian walked close behind Jihye, the knife never leaving her back. His tone was conversational, almost gentle. "You had such promise," he said. "I thought perhaps you would stay loyal, but no. You had to run. To meddle. To steal from me. I never belonged to you," Jihye said quietly. He chuckled. "Ah, but you did. You were the best of my foxes. Quick, clever, deadly when you needed to be. I admired that. Still do." They reached the end of the alley, where the walls curved inward into a small courtyard, half ruined and littered with old crates. The smell of brine was stronger here. "Stop," Valerian ordered. She obeyed. "Do you know what I despise most about you?" His voice was soft now, almost tender. "You remind me of myself. A creature made by hunger and deceit. But you lack discipline. You think running makes you free. It only makes you prey." Jihye's jaw clenched. "Then finish it." He smiled again, and for a moment she saw the young man he might once have been before ambition had hollowed him out. Gladly. His arm moved. The blade came for her spine, swift and certain, but before it could land, the world changed. The air cracked. A sound like tearing silk ripped through the narrow space, and light dimmed as though the sun had drawn breath and forgotten to exhale. Valerian's hand hesitated for a fraction of a second, enough for Jihye's body to move of its own accord. Her skin shivered, her bones stretched. The thing beneath her heart rose to the surface. In an instant, Jihye was no longer there. What stood before Valerian was a shape of blackness and motion, a void given flesh. The alley darkened around her, the light devoured by her presence. Her eyes, if they could be called that, gleamed white and endless. A scream tore from her throat, shrill and otherworldly, a sound that scraped the edges of thought. Valerian staggered back, eyes wide with horror. The knife fell from his hand, clattering against the stone. What are you?" The creature that had been Jihye moved. Its limbs were too long, its movements both graceful and terrible. The air itself seemed to twist in protest as she struck. Valerian tried to run. He managed 2 steps. Then she caught him. The sound was wet and final. He barely had time to cry out before she tore him apart. His body split cleanly down the center, blood spraying on the walls in a crimson arc. His 2 halves fell to the ground, the knife laying between them, gleaming faintly in the dim light. Joaquin rounded the corner just in time to see it. For a heartbeat, he froze. The sight before him was something out of a nightmare. The creature that stood over Valerian's remains turned towards him, its head tilted, movements sharp and inhuman. The void that had devoured Jihye's shape shimmered, edges rippling like oil or mortar. Then it began to move toward him. "Jihye," he called softly, his voice steady despite the fear crawling in his chest. "It's me." The creature hesitated. He spoke again, this time in a language that had not been heard by mortals in centuries. The words rolled from his tongue like music woven from wind and memory, gentle and sorrowful. It was an old elvish dialect, one used by his people to calm the wild things of the forest, to remind them their names. The creature stopped. The white light in its eyes flickered. Its head tilted again, this time almost curious. The air shimmered, and for the first time since the transformation began, Jihye's voice echoed faintly within the sound, distant and frightened. Joaquin took a step forward, slowly, hands open. "You know me," he said in the same tongue. "You are safe." The void rippled violently as though a storm had broken beneath its surface. The light flared and then dimmed. A sound escaped it. Not a scream this time, but a gasp, raw and human. Then the shape began to fold in on itself. The darkness shrank, twisting, condensing into what was left was a young woman, trembling on the cold stones. Jihye collapsed to her knees, gasping for air. Her skin was pale and slick with sweat, her hair plastered to her face. She shivered violently, eyes wide and unfocused. Joaquin was at her side in an instant. He knelt, lifting her gently until her head rested against his lap. She flinched at the touch, then went still, the sound of her breathing shallow and uneven. "It's all right," he whispered. His hand brushed her hair from her face, his voice steady and low. "You are safe now." Tears streaked the soot on her cheeks, though her eyes did not seem to see him. He began to sing. The words were soft and melodic, the same ancient tongue, a lullaby passed from one generation of elves to the next. It spoke of rivers that forgot their floods and of stars that forgave the night. The melody wrapped around them like a blanket. Gradually her breathing slowed, her trembling eased, and the tightness in her jaw loosened. When at last she fell quiet, Joaquin took his cloak from his shoulders and draped it over her. The fabric was warm and smelled faintly of pine and steel. She stirred once, whispering something he could not catch, then fell into uneasy sleep. Joaquin stayed there for a moment, his eyes on the dark stains that marked the stones nearby. Valerian's blood pooled thick and silent, already cooling. He exhaled long and slow. "So ends one hunt," he murmured, "and begins another." Carefully he lifted Jihye into his arms. She was light, her head falling against his shoulder. He adjusted his grip, pulling the cloak tighter around her to shield her from the chill. Then he turned back towards the street. The marketplace was still busy, the noise and light undisturbed by what had transpired in the shadows. Joaquin walked quickly but without haste, keeping his head bowed, the weight in his arms hidden beneath the fold of his cloak. When he reached the inn, the sky had begun to turn amber with sunset. He pushed through the door of the Copper Heron and nodded briefly to the innkeeper, who barely glanced up from polishing a tankard. Joaquin climbed the stairs to their rooms and laid Jihye gently on the bed. She stirred faintly but did not wake. For a long time he watched her, the light from the window painting her face in soft gold. She looked fragile, human, yet he could still feel the echo of what she had become in the air around her. The void that had taken her form had not gone, it had only retreated. Joaquin's hand brushed his bow unconsciously. The elvish words still hung in his mind like smoke. "She is no longer just a fox," he whispered to himself. Something far older looks through her eyes. He reached for the chair beside the bed and sat, his gaze never leaving her. Outside, the sea wind howled against the shutters, carrying with it the scent of salt and storm. Raphael would return soon. When he did, Joaquin knew the time for comfort would end, and the time for truth would begin. He glanced once more at Jihye, at the faint rise and fall of her chest beneath the cloak. "Sleep," he murmured. "You will need your strength for what comes next."